The concept and the idea of bamboozling, of tricking a user into doing some action or behavior that they otherwise wouldn't, is one of the easiest ways to compromise a system, and it's referred to as social engineering. To begin, let's you and I take a look at some examples of social engineering, and these three examples have happened in my space within the last 20 days. Here on the left, I got an email message that from my inbox appeared to come from my daughter. But upon closer inspection of the email, it was not my daughter's email address, and in the email it was attempting to have me click on some link. And that's an example of phishing, where the attacker is attempting to bamboozle the user into doing something that they normally wouldn't do or shouldn't do. Another example that recently happened was a text message I got from a friend. And in this text message, it had a link, and right before the link, it said, hey, get on this so we can chat. And then it had a link, and it had my name embedded as part of that link. So although it's possible that I could have a friend who created a link and wanted me to go ahead and jump on it to chat, it's probably not likely, especially in the event that there's so many other ways of traditionally communicating with another user or another person. So I responded back and I said, are you okay? And then she responded back and she said, my phone has been hacked. Now, the other thing we could do possibly too is with these URLs that we have and the links, we could go up to virustotal.com, put in those URLs, and just get an opinion of the website. But what we would never want to do is click on these links directly to see, hey, I wonder what's there. So the old saying that curiosity killed the cat, that's a pretty good saying, because curiosity also is what can kill the security of an end user. And then another example is a piece of paper that showed up on one of my relatives' doorsteps. They had the information up here. Sorry, we missed you. It looked like a delivery had been attempted. So they're asking us to go ahead and call this number and then provide a confirmation ID. It says, oh, please see the important notice on the back. Well, on the back it says that if you call that number, you're giving them permission to go ahead and do marketing to you at that number. There was no package involved ever. And one of the questions that we may ask is why? Why is social engineering and the human factor such a huge risk in organizations today? And there are some fundamental behaviors that makes individuals like you and I vulnerable to attacks with social engineering. And those behaviors include trust. Because at some level, most people want to trust other people. For example, in most governments and communities and cities, there are laws. And we have trust that those laws will be followed. Another factor is ignorance. Specifically, I don't mean ignorance in general, but ignorance regarding social engineering. There also could be ignorance regarding how devastating the result could be if a social engineering attack is successful. Another factor is fear. For example, if there's a vishing attack, which involves a telephone, and the V in vishing is for voice. The attacker, possibly using hypnotic language, could convince the other person on the line that something really bad is going to happen unless they comply. For example, the IRS is auditing you and you need to pay this money and do it right now, or some other activity that the user would normally never do. Fear also comes into play if somebody's system has been encrypted and ransom is being requested. The fear of losing that important data may lead that user into doing something that otherwise they wouldn't, including paying a ransom in an attempt to get the keys to unlock the data. There also could be greed involved. Perhaps a user at a company has been there for a long time. They feel they've been taken advantage of. Like the character with the thick glasses from the movie Office Space, who feels he's entitled to some kind of a reward and as a result might comply and do something illegal or unethical to get personal gain at the cost or expense of the company. And the last one I like to list here is moral obligation, where the victim or the target feels that they're morally obligated to help another individual. They may not realize they're helping an attacker, but they feel like they're just doing the right thing. For example, there's a few people on a smoke break. They're all coming in, and one of them comes in, has a box that they're carrying, and so some other person holds the door for them. And unknowingly, it's an attacker with a fake badge who's dressed like the other workers, who has now entered the physical premises and is one step closer to compromising the company. So companies are at risk to social engineering attacks because most of them, for the most part, have insufficient training. They may have lack of controls. And with controls, there are several types. There's technical controls. And when we talk about technical controls, we're talking about things such as firewalls and access control lists and the amount of privileges or rights that a user has on a system. There's also administrative controls. And examples of administrative controls would include things like a background check before a person is hired, or separation of duties, so the person who makes the purchase order request is not the same person that approves the purchase order request. And mandatory vacations, or at least rotation of duties, so that a person, if there's fraud or some other malicious activity involved, the idea is that if they can be removed from that for a period of time, hopefully that fraud or that mischief can be identified and stopped. And of course, there's also physical controls. And physical controls would include things such as physical security, proper lighting, security guards. So having the proper controls in place are going to help reduce the risk, including the risk of an attack by a social engineer. Because if our user Bob has access to diddly squat, he has zero access to the systems, and somebody hacks in his account and they log in as Bob, they're not going to get too far because Bob has very limited rights. Another issue for many companies is that they are so huge. So they have several organizational units, several departments, and maybe one of those departments doesn't have their security up to snuff. And that would be the department that a hacker or an attacker would want to get into because it's the easiest to get in. Once they're in that department or the systems of that department, then they can go ahead and weave their way into other areas of the company. And the fourth area I would say would be a lack of policies, the appropriate policies regarding what to do and how to do it, and have that information get back to the actual users who have to implement or abide by that policy. So the reason that social engineering is so darn effective is because humans are very susceptible. It's also very difficult to detect. And as a result, there's no quote unquote perfect way to completely eliminate the risk, but we can certainly mitigate or reduce it by proper training. The other challenge with social engineering is that there's not like a specific piece of hardware, like a firewall that we can plug in and that's going to solve all of our problems, because that device doesn't exist. There is no single piece of anything because security is an overall process. It needs to be integrated throughout a system and the users of that system, and it needs to be baked in or a core ingredient as opposed to just maybe sprinkling on some security on the top of it after all is said and done. So here are the 4 basic phases in a social engineering attack. Number 1, there's going to be research on the target company. And that can be done in a variety of ways. We've had nuggets on reconnaissance and footprinting. And then once the research has been done, a victim is selected. It could be a frustrated individual or simply an easy target. Then the hacker could develop a relationship or a friendship with that selected target. And that relationship could be built physically by going to common places such as restaurants or bars or other activities that the victim has interest in. Or it certainly could be done digitally by the attacker identifying what the user is interested in, creating a bogus social media page, and then slowly and comfortably building a relationship that way with the intended target. Then the final goal is for the attacker to exploit that relationship, to collect sensitive information or get access to details that they otherwise shouldn't have through the victim. One of the techniques the social engineer may use is impersonation, where they're pretending to be someone legitimate or an authorized person when they're not really that person. And the communication method could be one of many things. It could be email, it could be a telephone call, it could be through social media, or it could be physically in person. And the goal of that impersonation is to try to trick the user into revealing sensitive information and or doing some type of activity that's going to benefit the attacker. Some examples of impersonation may be the attacker calling the help desk and saying something like, "Hi, this is Bob from Human Resources. I forgot my password. I can't get in. Can you help me?" Or posing as an important user. And that may go something like this. "Oh my gosh, JJ Abrams is on the set. I'm the executive assistant for him. He cannot get into email. He's got 10 minutes before he has to go ahead and go to another meeting. He needs help and he needs it right now. Man, he is pissed." And I don't know JJ Abrams, but when I was worked at Paramount Pictures a long, long time ago in a galaxy far away, we had some very important individuals on the lot. And whenever their name was called out, people got an additional pump of adrenaline to get the job done. So that could be used as part of impersonation as well. Or the attacker may pose as a technical support person. And this one's happened to me. It didn't happen within the last 30 days, but it happened several months ago. Where they called, they said they were from Microsoft Tech Support. "Hello, this is Bob. I am from Microsoft Technical Support and I would like to help you. I hope you have a problem with your computer." And what they would do is they would proceed to have their victims look up information in their computer. And they were looking for some value. And that value is helped to reinforce to the victim that the caller really was from Microsoft. "Yes, I have this number. It matches your computer." And it's some string that's in every single computer. But to an unknowing victim, it may seem, wow, this person's legit. And then it might lead to them typing in a URL, going to a website. And then from there, there's just no end to what the attacker could do. Because once the user clicks on something, installs software, there could be remote control software, trojans, backdoors, etc. And after that point, with the machine and the user both compromised, the user could literally now have malware that they didn't have before, and they also might purchase a support contract from the attacker if the user still believes that the attacker is legitimate. So anytime that some company reaches out, especially with a phone call to a user and says, "I want to help you with a problem," you want to be very suspicious. Anytime there's something that happens and we think, wow, this seems a little bit off, or why would they be contacting me? We need to use Nancy Reagan's approach and just say no. And also, as part of a good incident handling procedure at a company, we would need to escalate that and report it to the right individual so the company can be aware that that attempt was being made. Other techniques include eavesdropping, just listening in on conversations that otherwise shouldn't be public, or shoulder surfing, which is looking over another person's shoulder as they're typing or you're seeing information on their screen. There's dumpster diving, where the attacker is going into the trash receptacle at the place of business looking for information that's been thrown away, that hasn't been disposed of or destroyed properly. There's also the concept of tailgating or piggybacking, and that's when we have a secure access into a facility. That secure access might be a door, or it could be a man trap, which is intended to only let the authorized individual through, and through social engineering, the attacker attempts to have that bypassed by either carrying a box or getting some other method to have an authorized user allow the unauthorized user into the physical premises. And on the computer side of social engineering, we have techniques like pop-up windows or hoax letters or chain letters or messages that pop up on screens or instant messenger type of communications or spam or fake websites or redirection of the customers to fake websites, all of which could encourage that user to click or do something that would compromise their system. And the difference between a phishing attack, which is email-based, trying to get the user to click or do or install something based on an email that was sent to them, versus a spear phishing attack, is that a spear phishing attack is directed at specific individuals, for example, in a company. So when the attacker discovers that Bob really loves cars, perhaps a .pdf is created that's malicious, but the PDF is all about the type of cars that Bob is interested in. So the email is sent to Bob, appearing to come from someone else that's non-malicious, with the hopes that Bob will click on that link or open that PDF, which then leads to the compromise. So the question could be asked, what can be done to help prevent or mitigate against social engineering? And we've already mentioned a few, including user training that should be done and policies that should be in place. And as part of those policies, including administrative policies, we should have separation of duties, so that prevents a single individual from having the rights to completely destroy or compromise a system. It'll also help reduce fraud if we're doing a separation of duties approach. There's also more great nuggets on tools and techniques like this in the CISSP course. If you want to go take a look at that for additional details on things like separation of duties and rotation of duties and other items related to CIA. And CIA in the context of security represents confidentiality, data integrity, and availability, which is what CISSP is primarily about. And regarding our list here, we'd also want to have controls in place regarding access, so that if we have sensitive information, it's not just laying around on file systems. It should be accessible only by the authorized user who needs that information, which also goes back to the rule of least privilege. So if Bob is in sales, Bob should have access to all the tools and features he needs and data he needs as part of the sales team, but he should not have just unfettered access to other systems in the company. So that way, if he does get compromised, he won't have the ability to offer the attacker anything outside of what he has rights to. There should also be proper logging and auditing in place, because we absolutely want to see what's going on the systems. And here's a good practice. Let's say we have a AAA server. AAA is an acronym for Authentication, Authorization, and Accounting. And as an accounting server, we can have all of our logs and messages sent to a centralized location. And a great practice is to have one of those servers which is not accessible by the typical admin. So if this is the AAA server that the admins have access to, we might want to have another one that gets a copy of all that the admins do not have rights to. That way the admins themselves can't go to the AAA server and simply delete the records. It also implies that the hacker, if he gains admin rights, can't go over and start deleting records on the server, this server right here over on the far left, because he doesn't have access to it. Because you and I absolutely want to know what's going on or what has gone on in the network and on the systems. We should have the proper policies in place. And the policies for a company are really the responsibility of the senior management team. Now, it's not their job to actually implement the policy. They're not creating access control lists, and they're not in human resources doing background checks on the users themselves. But what they are responsible for is identifying at a high level what the policy should be regarding sensitivity of data, et cetera, what the risks are, and then having their management team below them and the technicians below that actually do the implementation and verification of those policies. And if there is sensitive data that is not being used anymore, but you need to keep it, a company needs to keep it, they should go ahead and archive that. So they still can get access to it, but maybe it's not online for the attacker as well to just grab it. And while we're talking about archives, we should also have a proper backup of our critical systems. So that if there is a compromise, maybe there's cryptography that's been implemented through ransomware on our critical systems, we should be able to go ahead and restore from a backup and get that data back all the way up to the point of our last backup. In this nugget, you and I have taken a look at some of the concepts, phases, and techniques regarding social engineering. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.